So today I have a question, and that is, what does it mean for men to be the glory of God and women to be the glory of men, especially as it's described in 1 Corinthians chapter 11. St. Paul has a famous phrase specifically regarding head coverings for women in the church. I think a corollary question to that is the question of what is beauty. Yes, I know it sounds kind of random. Why are we talking about that? But I think beauty has direct relevance to understanding women are the glory of men principle, while men are the glory of God principle. Is beauty a sexist concept? What is beauty? Is there objective beauty? And what does it mean? Now, ever since I was a little girl, my dad had always said that it didn't matter who she was or what she looked like. If she was a woman, she was automatically beautiful. And when I heard that, I honestly didn't really understand what he was saying, even if on some level I thought it was sweet or maybe agreed with it because all women are beautiful. Somewhat unconscious level, I think it sounded a little sexist to say that. And maybe that's also where a lot of people go when it comes to talking about beauty. And there's certainly a beauty is sexist or female beauty is sexist that's certainly a trend in a lot of these feminist circles. And the logic goes something like, why should women always be connected to beauty? Why do women have to be beautiful? Why do women have to specifically fit some sort of beauty standard? It's oppressive or limiting to them to attribute something very specific that ignores all their other virtues. Any discussion that we have of the feminine beauty ideal as it applies to women is sexist according to a lot of feminists and according to maybe a lot of modern people generally, and that's because it observes that on a fundamental level women are beautiful as a rule, and that it constrains women to a social, typically highly unachievable aspect of aesthetic and sexual appeal for men. That on a fundamental level, women are valued for superficial appearances rather than merit. That women, much more than men, are obliged to change their appearances for the sake of the world. So that's one take that I think muddies the waters when we talk about what beauty is, and especially what beauty is specifically with women and specifically in relationship to men. If the every woman is beautiful concept is not sexist, then certainly maybe to some people it sounds naive or just not true. Sort of on the other side of the political spectrum, maybe some people think that it's a everyone gets a gold medal kind of thing, and what they hear is a strange sort of Descartes self-declaration, TikTok girl, if you think you're beautiful, then you are. Where subjectively we can experience beauty, so therefore that's ultimate reality, and whatever clothing you choose or look you decide on, even if it's outlandish, it's de facto beautiful because you're a woman and you chose it, and that type of choice is empowering and beautiful. These two ways of understanding or reacting to the feminine beauty ideal, to this statement that all women are somehow beautiful, are both wrong.
We created it. Not this time. No.
These are both bad reactions. They're wrong for actually the same reasons, even if they're coming from very different perspectives. Declaring that women are beautiful, which is indeed what this video is about, isn't the same thing as saying that every woman will be attractive to all men. It's not the same thing as saying every woman will look the same. It's not the same thing as saying women have to look a certain way in order to be beautiful. And it's not even the same thing as saying that because they have this inner beauty empowerment concept, they are ultimately beautiful. Every choice that they make is the one that makes them beautiful. In other words, it's none of those things. And that's because all of those things, all of those non-real axioms, are perspectives that interestingly depend on a worldview that understands beauty as a social construction. Controversial as it sounds, beauty is not a social construction. It is not even in the eye of the beholder, per se. Beauty, in other words, is not an ought statement. It is an is statement. It is a description of our world and women, and specifically it is a description of the way the world and women were made and what they are. This leads us to our kind of ultimate or penultimate question, which is, what is beauty? What do we mean when we talk about it? Any clinical definition can get a bit circular, frankly. I think Merriam-Webster says beauty is the quality of being physically attractive. It can be understood as something instinctive, like you know it when you see it kind of thing. And then I know a lot of people go down the mathematical route of defining objective beauty and the symmetry of the eyes, nose, and the mouth, and the chin to jaw, neck ratio, all of that. This video, I'm not so ambitious to make and circumscribe beauty in mathematical terms. I think it is well within reason to simply state existential terms. And that is that a thing is beautiful when it motivates the consciousness to move outwards from itself. Or in other words, it's an inspiration. I think Jonathan Pajot describes beauty this way. Beauty is the primary way that we interact with truth, or the primary way that we interact with the world. So we interact with beauty when we see a really good movie. We also sort of interact with beauty in its inverse when we see a really bad movie. When people see a terrible movie in theaters and they walk away and they're like, oh my gosh, that was so terrible. That in some ways is a discussion of beauty. And it's the same thing when, someone maybe even has a really, really good interaction with another person. It doesn't have to be the person of the opposite sex, but if it's particularly, especially enlightening conversation where things were happening and someone was being seen, there's a beauty in that. In other words, beauty is not purely sexual, even though I think that's how a lot of us function towards one another and between the sexes. It's a very normal understanding of it. It's not a wrong understanding of it. It's just one way of understanding it. Most importantly, it's a way that we can understand. Beauty is a way in which we can understand even what's going on in the world. Pajot calls it the pattern. Beauty functions as a way to experience the pattern, and it's a means through which this existential truth can be revealed to us and carry out in memory for us for the rest of our lives. A lot of people have these, I think a lot of people could relate to very beautiful moments in their childhood of a beautiful man or a beautiful woman speaking to them with beautiful words, either by a stranger or it was a relative or a friend. It could especially be interacted with like in an arts forum. If you're going to the theater, I grew up with a lot of musical theater, so for me, I definitely interacted with beauty in that sense, especially on the stage when you have the makeup. It doesn't truly matter if you're like a sexually, mathematically, objectively beautiful person. You have, the spotlight on you, and specifically if you're good. This isn't the case if you're not good. I'm sorry, there's discrimination there. But if you're good, and if you're talented, and you sing really well, and, you have a sense of true pattern about you, then it's beautiful. It doesn't matter if maybe without all of the talent and the makeup and all of that, you're not maybe the most physically attractive individual, but you do exhibit this beauty. And so, if we can understand beauty in that sense, we come back to why it is that I can say women are beautiful and always will be understood in terms of beauty, and it to be a completely serious statement and for it to not be sexist. That's because I'm operating not from a social construction type of way or like delusional subjectivity, inner beauty kind of way, but rather an overarching truth that women operate in this, I guess you can call it objective beauty, because they are the pinnacle of the creation pattern. They are a way that particularly men, reckon with their own pattern of creation. That's what anticipates St. Paul's description of women being the glory of men to begin with, especially as he says that in direct addressing of men being created first and women being created second. And it is really important to understand that because women are created second, that beauty principle is somewhat heightened for her. Now, it's interesting, this conversation is a little tricky because every woman has a specific relationship to her own beauty. I don't think it's controversial to say that it is a mark of the coming of age story for every woman, even for the feminist or the one who wants to reject beauty completely. There's always a personal element of their own value and beauty connected to their story. And in consumerism, beauty, at least in terms for women and for the world, is primarily the external qualities of a person, you know, their Gucci bag or their skin glowing or their body or their weight. A lot of these things are genuinely judgments based off of the values of different cultural epochs. And so this makes women especially wrestle with that question, are women in fact inherently beautiful, with both kind of a yes or no. Yes, in the sense that anyone can be beautiful if they wish they were and are so to some, and no in the sense that not every woman practically meets like every standard and expectation for beauty of society or for beauty standards for men. The feminists see this as a problem. They say that beauty therefore is somewhat a mark of a social order. Social order almost always is inherently oppressive to women. It's sexist. Women are shamed into being beautiful, and really we shouldn't be ever expecting women to be beautiful in the first place. Beauty is a social construction, in other words. It's postmodern speak for unnatural or anti-natural. A beauty is artificial, created by men. Again, this is just a perspective from strain of feminism, and is created in order to oppress women and her otherwise natural state of non-beauty to a state of unnatural perfection simply for the male gaze. For the feminist, the solution to this problem of beauty is simple. Basically, you're going to want to abandon the ideal of beauty, especially feminine beauty. Maybe even ideally, you would engage with beauty with immense irony and subversion, with women considering any means of dressing attractively as only as an active or hostile F you to the man, that she did this for her and for her alone. It was not for a man's attention. Beauty done in any other way is only complicit with the patriarchy, only causes competition and self-hatred, sexual harassment in some cases, and depression. And it's interesting to see this tension in many feminist strains, because on one hand, I see that women, aspire to have some understanding of beauty, even if it's not the conventional understanding. They want to be seen as beautiful, especially by other women. But on the other hand, they don't understand or want to understand why they want to be beautiful, or even if they, by truth standards, are. To be beautiful, in other words, sort of becomes like an elusive status that one can try to achieve in her life, but as soon as she thinks she's got it, slips away. That's such an archetype in old Hollywood. Sunset Boulevard. It's what marks the person who was so bright and shining in her 20s and 30s, maybe early 40s, but then she had her Hollywood life for a while. Now the industry's done with her and she's been thrown away. Real life example of this would be Marilyn Monroe. And what the feminist perspective misses is that beauty is not primarily a problem that women are cursed to contend with in society. It's not primarily that, at least. And to claim by achieving a certain look, beauty is a precept that all women are born with. And to say otherwise, instead see beauty not as a social construction, but as a pattern enacted in every created thing, especially humans, especially women, we begin to understand why, in fact, women are and very often represent and exhibit the feminine beauty ideal. The greatest way to think about it is the creation story in Genesis. The creation story in Genesis is a story about completing forms in a beautiful way. Specifically that we have God who continually discloses his reality through creation, through word, creation, and appearance. And the creation story is therefore just a story of completing and revealing forms over time. It's why after each day is listed in Genesis, it says that God can see what he did was good, or he can see that what was being enacted on earth or in the heavens was good in that form as it established itself, or even, for some of the plants, it was producing good fruit. God saw that he was disclosing a bit of himself in the world, a bit of reality. It is why the telling of the creation story even takes place over time, to emphasize the power of finishing something gradually with apprehension. We can think of it like seeing the beauty, or comparing the beauty between a 5-year-old's finger painting that they did in like 10 minutes, which may just be modern art nowadays. Joke, sorry, not sorry. To comparing it to the beauty of a painting by the artist Rembrandt. By comparing it to the storm on the Sea of Galilee, we see that piece has extraordinary detail and precision, and it's very obvious that it took time to master. You may not be able to access all of that meaning in the same way looking at a Rembrandt painting than you would look at a 5-year-old's finger painting. People may want us to say one should instinctively be able to say that one is beautiful or more beautiful than the other, and that Rembrandt is objectively more beautiful than a child's finger painting, because we can see that there is an accessible truth disclosed to everyone who can relate to it. And while there might be subjective beauty to experience with a child's drawing, especially if it's your child's drawing, there's still lacking a notion of completedness, of maturity, that real beauty is remembered for. And it makes canonical artists remembered for time immemorial. As much as, we want to talk about there being differences in cultural art and beauty standards, architecture, and different artistic periods, there's sort of a meta-reality that cultures celebrate. That reality often draws us in together of what it means to be human, especially as it relates to God, and what it means to fulfill our destiny, what it means to live healthily and upright, and to overcome darkness. And typically these things are things that took a really long time and took the most talent. It's why, the most beautiful songs or architecture or churches are typically the ones that take the longest to compose or build over decades or entire lifetimes. And if you're Mozart, over an entire day, every day you can complete something amazing and beautiful. Thus, we can see that the creation story is a story of beauty perfecting itself, or disclosing itself and climaxing over time. And it reaches its pinnacle, beauty reaches its pinnacle with the creation of man. And that's why it's said that men are the glory of God, because we have this penultimate creation of God instilling his image onto man. But it's not just man, and it's certainly, God's image is across genders, obviously. But there is a distinction with creating women second. And it's that if we really want to be correct about this, the pinnacle of beauty didn't stop at man, it stopped at women. And the creation of man, while being beautiful by himself, is heightened through the creation of women. And with women, we have an introduction of things like potential, of things like growing more life, things like seduction. These are all good things inherently, and women are uniquely beautiful in that sense, because it is through her creation that the pattern of the male body, the image of the man, and the anatomy becomes complete. It becomes full. The natural woman is beautiful because she brings to life that which was before her. She is the pattern finale. And in fact, anatomically, these are actually things that we interact with in women. An example of that are her breasts. The breast is anatomically based in a created form. Men technically have nipples and that breast tissue as well, but not as much. And it was, in fact, the the man's ribs or his chest that God used to create a woman. So she matches the particularity through her breast. She basically brings a man to a fullness. And the breast is that much more beautiful because it completes that picture. It breeds and nourishes life, obviously through breastfeeding, and it provides the sustenance for creation. So when we say women are beautiful, that's because we are saying women are the image of man in full bloom. It is because Adam was given an opportunity to recognize that something was equal to him. So St. Paul has a direct continuation with this principle when he writes that men are the glory of God and women are the glory of men. Women, being the glory of men, represent the feminine beauty ideal. And men being the glory of God is a statement of establishing pattern, like naming the animals and naming Eve. In fact, Adam gives Eve 2 names, because it was from a man who was the glory of God that women were even created. Women, therefore, are an example of man's glory or pattern just being made again, or connected to, maybe even connected to a wider distinctive role to multiply and fill the earth. What Paul certainly is not saying is that women aren't the glory of God, in a sense that women don't have the image or virtue of God and men are more virtuous or anything like that. The term that's used for glory is doxa, and it's often translated as a pattern or principle, that men kind of represent this principle in a way of God, of God as a creator or God as articulator, maybe more. That can be seen in different ways, that men have authority in the world that's different than women. And certainly, in the church, we see that men exercise that authority more outwardly than women do, which I think can arguably be made as a statement that men have more authority, but in no way does that mean that men have more importance than women at all, or that men are in any way like ontologically superior. All it means is that there's sort of this like first image or first iteration of the God-man, essentially, and then there's a second iteration of the God-man that we call woman, and the woman is so incredibly crucial to this like pattern of iterating beauty that it's through her body that more iterations of God men and God women can be created. Because of that, it's like a mirror. You have the first principle of men being created, and then you have kind of like a mirrored image of that, or a nested image of that. I think, in math it's called recursive. Like you have something else that is pretty much exactly like it, but smaller, or it fits in. It doesn't have, the same amount of breadth or space. I think of things like the Russian doll set. You have like the first Russian doll, that's the biggest, and then you have a second Russian doll that's exactly the same Russian doll, but it's smaller and it fits inside. And it's sort of like, it's like the mirror image of the first Russian doll. It's not that one is better than the other, and in fact it's the fact that it keeps getting smaller and smaller that makes it so beautiful, that makes it so delicate and so precious. So in other words, feminine glory is a beauty that is recursive, that connects mankind to a fullness of pattern, and therefore can be called a meta glory or a meta beauty. And therefore Paul concludes that for this reason, that women are the glory of men, the woman ought to have a symbol of authority on her head because of the angels. Paul here is not discussing the symbol of authority as something given as a power dynamic between the sexes. In fact, he speaks of women's own unique feminine purpose or authority given by God himself as a sign of God's authority and power and glory given to women specifically. This power and this honor of having been created for men's sake and having been created to be the beauty for man, that she ought to respect that order by choosing to be that glory, covering her head as her beauty is sacred. And this brings us to, I would say a final or concluding note, which is that the principle of covering something beautiful can sound baffling, but it actually kind of ties in this dialogue of feminine attention and feminine beauty, and accusations of sexism to its coherent conclusion. And it's that beauty, especially when it's in women, especially since it's accentuated in women, is inherently intermingled with a principle of protection or discreteness. Maybe protection is too alarming of a word, but I think discreteness might be a better word. And I read this message from Bishop Alexei of Alaska in an article he wrote called The Helmet of Salvation, and he writes, "What does the head covering mean? Well, we can start by looking at what it means to cover anything in the context of church. The holy chalice is covered by a covering at the great entrance. The altar is covered by the curtain. Why do we cover the chalice? Why is the curtain a covering for the altar? It is because the chalice is holy. It is because the altar is holy. So we cover what is holy, what is precious, what is honored, and what deserves protection. We cover a woman's head." I think that's really beautiful. We can see here that the beauty of a woman, capitalized in her noggin, is covered not because she's oppressed, subjugated to her husband per se. In fact, I think there's interesting debates as to whether even women are covering their heads if they're married or not. So regardless of whether they're married, certainly I think in St. Paul's day it was still a way even for single women to honor their head. So it wasn't a way of being relegated to husband as master. No, it was that there's a unique power of a woman representing the beauty, representing the glory of men, if you will, and it comes intentionally from God, and it therefore should be honored. It should be protected. And to compare it to the altar, as Bishop Alexei had done, I think it makes sense to compare that because the altar is, the womb of the Theotokos. It is the hidden person in her person, Theotokos who carried Christ, her inner person, her body, in a way. It's so electric that it can't just be seen by anybody. Why there's a hiddenness to the altar. And this can even be applied to the hiddenness of the Eucharist, to covering the cups and shielding it even from the baptized if they weren't prepared to receive it that day. So we can see that the appeal for a woman to be covered is not because her body is evil or because she's the source of sexual perversity, because of what she wore, because she causes her brother to stumble, or any of the strange mental gymnastics that people could do when talking about female beauty and covering. Any principle for a woman to be covered in Christianity is in deep respect to the theology of liturgy and the altar and the Eucharist. The woman, like the altar, should keep her beauty hidden for God and from the sight of those who are not worthy to behold it. Sadly, I think I know what happens when other people, see a woman in all of her beauty that they were not ready for or simply not worthy to behold it. And suddenly that beauty that was given to her, gift, the means of violation, either because of something traumatic or something that maybe even the woman was complicit in. And the world, because it doesn't understand such things, it doesn't really acknowledge this meta beauty in women. It tries to diminish it to some consumer or power related thing. It materializes it so much. It's hard for us to really conceptualize this without trying to be legalistic about it. But I think the short of it is that Bishop Alexei sees the head covering as armor for the woman to defend her from, he writes, scandal, suspicion, and envy. And this principle extends to everything society wants us to think about with regard to the feminine beauty, as the covering of a woman generally acts as a shield from the evil from other people, or quote, lustful men. And so this principle extends to everything society wants us to think about with regard to the feminine beauty, as the covering of a woman should simply be seen as a shield to protect her against the evils of men or other women. In that sense, we see how beauty for the woman is her holiness, it's her preciousness, it's not diminutive or oppressive. Pursuing a healthy relationship with her specific beauty, each woman has the personal invitation to cover herself in the defense of Christ's love, who actually adores that beauty. In conclusion, we can say that yes, women, in fact, all women are beautiful. It's in their nature. It's in their God-given right. Women represent that beauty in being the second principle that was made after man. Being beautiful is not a sexist, it's not a sexist, oppressive philosophy or paradigm. Having the feminine, beauty ideal doesn't suddenly mean that you have to, wear however many pounds of makeup, or if you like makeup, that's great too, but it doesn't mean that you have to wear a certain amount of makeup. It doesn't mean you have to wear a certain amount of jewelry or accessories, or have to shop at a certain place, or you have to work out in a certain way. Beauty is already truly written in a woman, and it's the reason why, the beauty of woman and man, the beauty of mankind was so good, in fact, that they were naked and unashamed in paradise. And this is a picture of disclosure of beauty in its finest and fullest. But we don't live in paradise anymore, sadly. With the fall of mankind, we inherently we have a different relationship to beauty that immediately has to do with covering and has to do with discreetness. So we can see that while in paradise, indefinite nakedness does not bring them harm, outside of paradise, which is where we all live, outside of the paradise of your bedroom or bathroom, indefinite nakedness brings compromise. In some ways, even if you're not completely naked outside, interacting in a way that exposes even more can expose compromise. So to acknowledge one's beauty for now ultimately means to cover it.